Welcome to the newest episode of the European Republic. And today I have an extraordinary guest, Anton Shekhovtsov. Anton is a political scientist. He directs the Center for Democratic Integrity and is a visiting professor at the Central European University in Vienna. His research is focused on political warfare, especially on the weaponization of the far right by non-European autocratic forces like Russia. On his blog Towers of Europe, which I highly recommend, he writes with great clarity about these topics and about the state of interregnum Europe finds itself today. Welcome, Anton. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Nikodem, and thank you very much for having me.
Great having you. Um, let's start directly to the core topic. In your recent writings and presentations, you talk about how today Europe, and especially a united Europe, holds the torch of a free democratic world, and how autocratic forces like Russia try to extinguish it, which is, I think, very obvious in the case of Russia, because they wage a kinetic war in Ukraine against a European country. But what's less obvious to see is the political front, the political warfare, where you are basically the expert. What role does political warfare play today, and how does it affect actually Europe? And how does it differ from classical propaganda, hybrid warfare, and kinetic war?
Well, let me start with saying that a war, it's an instrument of convincing another nation to do one's will. Yeah, it's a classical interpretation, it's a classical definition of what a war means, but it's also a very extreme measure. Yeah, with war, especially if you're waging a kinetic war, you spend a lot of money. It's also it's a huge cost in human lives. Yeah, so a war is an extreme measure. Yeah, so for example, if a nation, one country wants to convince another nation to do something, yeah, or stop doing something,
Hmm.
it may use this war. But before it does so, there are other measures that the country may use if it wants to influence a behavior of another nation. And so, for example, in peacetime, we also try to, well, nations try to influence other nations. But in peaceful times, we use soft power, yeah, the power of attraction. We use trade, yeah, we use strategic aid, yeah. And we try to aid other nations, and so we look better in our eyes and in the eyes of other nations. But it's all about influence, yeah. We are influencing other nations by these measures. Public diplomacy or traditional diplomacy, the same instruments. But when it doesn't work, yeah, we try to do something else. We try to employ other measures, other tools, other instruments. So we can go as far as the war, yeah, a kinetic conventional war. But before that, because again, it is costly, it is expensive. There is this gray area of political warfare, which means essentially, fighting a war, but not a conventional war, but using some instruments that in this gray area, like propaganda, like
Hmm.
disinformation, economic sanctions, which is basically economic coercion, yeah, or support for opposition groups in another country, opposition groups which are trying to come to power, and if we support them, maybe they will be on friendly terms with us. So if we don't like a government in that particular country, we would support the opposition. Sometimes there are extreme measures like supporting, say, separatist groups or paramilitary organizations, which is very, very close to actually being engaged in a conventional war, but it's still sort of below this threshold of a conventional war. So what Russia is doing in Ukraine, for example, is a kinetic war. Yeah, it's a conventional war, but it's also, and I think this is important to understand. This Russia is employing this measure because it failed with political warfare. because it was trying for many, many years to convince Ukraine to be in the Russian sphere of influence, to be part of the Russian civilization, of the Russian world, and it didn't work. And they used an entire range of political warfare instruments. It used sanctions. It used support for the opposition. There were several parties in Ukraine that were directly supported and funded, as well funded by the Russians. They tried to blackmail. They tried to, I don't know what, use all these anti-EU, anti-NATO
Mhm.
propaganda and disinformation. So the entire measures, yes, an entire range of measures, and it didn't work. Yeah, it failed with political warfare. And then when you fail with political warfare, you can either stop or you can still go on with these, gray area instruments, gray zone instruments, or you can start waging a war if it is important for you. Yeah, and for the Russians it was important.
Mhm. But
And
what? Yeah.
yeah, no, what I'm saying is that if Ukraine, if in Ukraine, it is waging a kinetic war, conventional war. It is waging a political warfare against Europe, yeah, or against the West in general. And if it fails with political warfare, it may try to use harsher instruments, really close to an actual conventional war. It is not a given, it doesn't have to. But it will depend also on how decisive they are in Moscow, and how serious they are about their own will to influence Europe and the West.
And what would you say? How serious are they? Because right now, I feel it feels like it's a turning point in the war a little bit, where the rhetorics also coming from the Kremlin are slowly backing down a little bit because they are losing, especially on the economic front. Or would you judge that?
No, absolutely. They are not doing well economically. A year ago, a year and a half ago, I would say that the Russians are playing for time. That
Hmm.
they're trying to, they're playing with Trump, um, or were playing with Trump, just to mimic or to imitate that they are somehow interested in some negotiations. They were never interested in the negotiations. It's just a bluff, it's a spectacle. It's theatrical. Yeah, but they were playing for time because they thought that the time was on their side, that the war of attrition, which is now happening essentially, it is about having resources, and time is one of those resources. And they thought that time as a resource was on their side. But now it's not. Now time is destroying their economy. Time is now of helping Ukraine with technological advancements, which are now, you know, in terms of technology, especially drone technology, which is the core of current of this conflict, of this war. Ukraine is winning this technological race. It is quite clear. It's not doing that great in terms of rockets, and bombs. Russia is still very much ahead of Ukraine in this sense, but with drones, which again lies at the core, at the heart of this war, Ukraine is winning, and time is now working for Ukraine, at least in this area. Yeah. So um, economy is not doing quite well. They may be so the Ukraine's tactic and even strategy at the moment is to convince Putin that the talks are necessary and they are also somehow in the interests of the Russian Federation. But for Russia, for Putin at least, he has his own obsessions, and those obsessions are not necessarily actually correspond to the actual interests of Russia as a state. whatever state it is, authoritarian, non-democratic or democratic, it doesn't matter. His interests, they are not corresponding to those interests, and that is why quite recently Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky sent that letter to Putin to tell him that you are destroying Russia. Yeah, we will probably never be friends again. Sort of. We will, of course, have you as a neighbor, but not as a friend, right? But you are destroying your own country, and it will be better for you to stop. For us, of course, it will be better if you stop. But it's also for you, it is better that you stop. So this is the current situation. This is the current Ukrainian strategy.
Mhm. Which is quite astonishing that like Ukraine is now even capable to disrupt like for a few days ago in St. Petersburg economic summit while Putin is there, despite basically the war in Iran also helping Russian economy right now with higher oil prices and also the US withdrawing from support from Ukraine. So despite the maybe I'm misreading it, but isn't like Russia have got didn't it get more breathing room from especially the American actions in the last 1 year?
I would say that the U.S. and Israel's aggression against Iran really helped Russia for the very first month,
Hmm.
because the prices went up. Um, Russia was not doing again. It hasn't been doing great economically, but it was provided this breathing space. But it was just a very short period of time. And interestingly, it was in many ways Ukraine that disrupted that breathing space, because Ukraine, even before that, before the start of the Iran war, had been targeting oil refineries and also the shadow fleet that is transferring Russian oil to other countries. So while it all started quietly, I would say, those attacks on refineries, now it is a huge problem. And Russia is already using billions of euros, not just millions, but billions of euros. And it is felt. It is really, really felt on the Russian side. But I would say that it wasn't Iran or even Iran war that is now helping Russia. Russia's major lifeline is China. It is China. There is no even discussion. A country that is helping Russia the most is China. China, of course, has its own interests. For China, it's a win-win situation. In fact, this whole Ukraine war, if Russia is winning, it means that the West is losing. Good for China. If Russia is losing, uh, you know, then it becomes even more um, dependent on China, and China is winning. So for China, it's really a good situation, however you look.
Yeah. China really also positioned itself in recent months like a hub for international diplomacy with a very well choreographed visits by Trump and then Putin in very short succession. Um, But here, that's also the other side of the Atlantic, where Americans, I mean, for a long time, it seemed like Trump is like a lifeline for Russia, or even like helped Russia. But this doesn't look as clear cut anymore. Which factor does Washington play here?
So I must say that Washington's foreign policy at the moment is a mess. Being very frank, they don't really have any strategy dealing with Russia or Europe. They all obsessed with China. This is their main foreign policy concern, and it has been since Obama. Since Barack Obama, unfortunately, many leaders in Europe did not recognize this, that it was China that was of interest to the Americans and not really Europe or
Hmm.
Russia. But this, foreign policy, especially in with regard to Russia, there is a there is definitely a concern that Russia may use nuclear weapons. this concern is real, it doesn't mean that the mere presence of this concern, that it's, that all foreign policy officials in the United States share this concern, but it is present and it does influence the tactics of the US when dealing with Russia. So this idea that we don't need to provoke Russia, we don't need to humiliate Russia too much, it is working. So the US, along also with the other Western powers in general, self-deterring themselves, self-deterring when dealing with the Russian Federation, and there is no understanding of what else to do. The strategy that has been adopted is very, very simple, in my opinion. It is wait and see. You know, we introduce sanctions on Russia. Probably at some point they will reconsider. Probably at some point they will realize that they are making a mistake. So this is the strategy, but it's a non-strategy as well. Wait and see is, if you don't have a vision, what you want to achieve, and you simply can't come up with the instruments to achieve that goal. Having a vision that Russia will reconsider is not really a vision. It's just a driven. This vision is driven by, well, the tactic that you've chosen to wait and see. Yeah, and what are you going to see? You don't know. Yeah, so the absence of the lack of imagination, even how to deal with Russia. I would say that, well, at least 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, there was a vision of a democratic Russia, and the binary approach to Russia, or the interpreting Russia, was that, well, it's either a democratic country
Hmm.
or it's a horrible dictatorship, and we need to prevent Russia from becoming a horrible dictatorship. But I don't think that Russia will ever become a democratic country. But it doesn't mean that it will have to be this aggressive all the time. It doesn't have to. There are authoritarian regimes that may be oppressive at home, but which are not which are somehow behaving on the international arena. So introducing more visions of how we want to see Russia in the West, I think, would be good for even the relations with the Russian Federation, or whatever form it will have in the future. Maybe it will remain as the Russian Federation, with the same borders. Maybe it will become smaller somehow. But Russia will exist. It will not disappear. We need to find an approach, and this approach needs to be not, I would say, not really idealistic. Yeah. Idealistic approach to Russia, I think, has failed us. Yeah, and in many ways, I guess the war against Ukraine is a result of this failure to be realistic about what Russia can be or can become in the future.
Hmm. Isn't here also a big issue? I mean, if I look at Russia, it seems like an empire that's like stuck at its own delusions. So for one, it had never really reconciled with its historic past, with the atrocities under Stalinism, with having started World War II. It still lives in very like narratives of grandeur. And if you look like at Russian state media, they talk all the time about wanting to nuke Western Europe, about fantasies of annihilation. It seems like a very locked into a very aggressive and non-reflective state.
Well, I see two things here in what you're saying. Well, first, I think the problem is, and it's a major problem, the problem is that while fascism was condemned after the Second World War, communism wasn't, and it couldn't, because the Soviet Union, a communist regime, a communist dictatorship, was one of the winners of the Second World War, despite the fact that it was also one of the countries that started the Second World War. It also was one of the winners of this war. So communism was not condemned. Stalinism was not really condemned. Only recently we saw some steps of condemnation of Stalinism together with fascism and Nazism. But there was no tribunal. There was no something like Nuremberg trial of the communist crimes, of the Soviet crimes against humanity, Stalinist crimes against humanity. War crimes were never condemned. War crimes committed by the Red Army. So it was all right to be a communist. While, of course, there was another extreme measure, especially in the U.S. This witch hunt. Seeing communists everywhere, under every bed, in every university. So it also was also happening. But this idea that the Stalinism basically got away with the crimes, it affected how Russia was looking at itself, how it was dealing with its own history. And while under the leadership of Mikhail Gorbachev at the end of the Soviet era, and a little bit under the presidency of Boris Yeltsin, who was the first president of post-Soviet Russia, there were attempts to deal critically with Russia's own history. But those attempts were taking place, especially in the 90s. Those attempts were taking place against the background of impoverishment of the Russian society. And liberalism, or liberal democracy, that was formally adopted by post-Soviet Russia, it was for many people, it was also associated with poverty, with economic decline, where post-Soviet Russia was not able to compete with many other countries economically, in terms of market. They joined they adopted free market. The idea in the West was very, very stupid. I'm saying this, quite bluntly. The idea was that if Russia, post-Soviet Russia, adopts capitalism, adopts market ideology, it will be a flourishing democracy. And this was an actual idea, that capitalism will necessarily bring democracy and liberalism. Well, it didn't happen. And capitalism for post-Soviet Russia was linked to the economic decline. So when you combine this decline, and this is how Putin came to power, he promised the restoration of greatness. He promised a more stable economic situation, especially after the financial crisis of the end of the 90s. And Putin was also helped, his agenda, his political agenda of building an authoritarian state in the Russian Federation was helped by the fact that prices for oil and gas went up incredibly, dramatically. They went, and then he had money to reform Russia the way he wanted Russia to look like. Yeah. So this is, in a nutshell, what happened with them, and also because it was these. Russia again became an authoritarian or consolidated authoritarian state. All that critical approach to its own history was forgotten, and there was a pushback from Stalinists, a pushback from totalitarians, and a pushback from imperialists who basically won this memory war.
Mhm. I mean, that's one of the great ironies of, I think, the last 2 or 3 decades, that the belief that if we spread like capitalistic trade, we will also see a spread of liberal democracy, which I mean worked after World War II in Western Europe. It worked with Germany and Japan to a certain degree, but it didn't work in the last 2 decades with Russia and China. And we got the opposite. We got very well capitalized autocracies that now work against democracy and fund anti-liberal forces. Um, what what can we in Europe do now to like pivot? What should we do? Or are there obvious paths that forward in
Well,
dealing with
it's a 1 million euro question. I
even more?
guess, yes,
Brilliant
maybe even
product.
more, a billion. No, look, I think that there are several ways to approach this question. The first question is something that I've already mentioned. It is
Hmm.
so if we're dealing with autocratic regimes, yeah, if we're dealing, we will have to deal. Well, we have to deal, and we will have to deal with Russia. We will have to deal with China. We will have to deal with the US, either under Trump or under someone else. It doesn't really matter. So we need to understand, or we need to imagine how exactly we want to look, how exactly we want to present ourselves in the future. You mentioned in the very beginning the term that I use myself very often, the interregnum. So very briefly, what it means. It means that the old world order is either gone or completely crushed or being crushed at this very moment. And the new order has not yet arrived. So we are stuck in this interregnum, meaning between two orders. And what is important for us, we should understand, well, there will be a new order. There will be a new set of rules. There will be a new international framework. So we need to understand who we want to be in that new order. Do we want to be just a territory where all those global players are behaving however they want to behave? Are we a playground for them? Are we an arena for a battle? Do we want to be a battlefield between three forces, two forces? Yeah. Or we want to be a player as well. Or we want to be a stakeholder in that new order. So once we imagine who we want to be, maybe for some people would say, well, let's just keep aligning ourselves with the US and do whatever they want from us, like it was during the Cold War era. They will provide protection for us again if we just follow whatever they say. Yeah. Or some would say, well, let's just align with Russia and we have to be friends with the Russian Federation. If they want to take Ukraine, yeah, well, let them have Ukraine. It's anyway part of this Slavic, whatever, Eastern. We don't know what it is. Yeah, if they want to have the Baltic states, of course, nobody will go to die for any of the Baltic nations, et cetera, et cetera. Well,
Yeah.
Russians want something that they already had, yeah, and during the Cold War era. Well, let them have it, and the other part we will be at peace. Yeah. So some would say this. Yeah. So if they have this vision, then for them what's going on is all right. This is already happening because this is exactly what is happening if there is no pushback from Europe as a united project. Yeah. So if they want this, yeah, then it's already fine. You do not have to do anything. You just have to stop support for Ukraine and then destroy NATO, and it's all right. Yeah. But if we want Europe to be a player, to be an independent, a sovereign geopolitical player, then it's just not enough. What we have today with the European Union, I think it's a great economic union. I think it's a great economic power, but it's not a geopolitical player. Or it can be. There is enough money. There is enough. There is enough resources to be a geopolitical power. What we are lacking is a will, a political will, and also the lack of a path towards a political structural framework that will solidify Europe as a geopolitical player on a par with the US and China. Probably not Russia. It's not a, if Europe is a great geopolitical power among others like China and the US, then Russia is not a problem. Then actually, maybe in the future, Russia can be reclaimed by a European project, not
Hmm.
necessarily entire Russia, but at least part of Russia, right? The European regions, for example. But it's a hypothesis. It's a imagination. So that's the point. Well, what to answer your question, it is about first we need to understand how we want to see ourselves in the future, and then act accordingly.
Hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think the future where like Europe returns to be like a divided and colonized and vassalized by Russia and the United States is not, for me, it's not something I want to see. But I wonder, how do we get to a more united Europe? Because, as you said, the political will is, and I think it's not really lacking. The problem is more, it's like divided into 27 nations and also into hundreds of structures. If I look at the European Parliament, for example, it has over 200 national parties, and every national party has its own interest and so on. So we lack like a push to consolidate this all. And that's a real practical challenge. How do we get from this current layer of nation states to some bloc that is really capable of standing for itself? Because, as you said, economically, also militarily, we would be, as a united Europe, a power on par with China and the United States. Um, do you see like any possible paths? I mean, you write in your articles that there are some moves, especially with two-speed Europe, that Germany is pushing for. Are these promising routes we should push for, and what should we do realistically?
First, I think that once we at least have a vision of what we want to achieve, how we want Europe to look like in the new order. Yeah, not just to be a vassal of other countries, of other geopolitical powers, but an independent player. So once we agree on that, we don't have to demand everything right now at once. It doesn't happen. It's an illusion. It is what the Europe that we want to build, the Europe that we want to achieve, is in the future. What we need to do is to take steps one by one that is leading to that vision. And there is no lack of strategies, at least for the first steps that we need to take. Consider the Mario Draghi's report, yeah, that was published a couple of years ago. And then you also have a follow up from him, and you have a follow up in terms of policy from the European Commission. Mario Draghi's report is a great report. It does provide a vision. I mean, it doesn't show you what's gonna be the end game. I think I know, and I think you also know what is the end game if we take those steps one by one and be coherent and be integral with our path. But it was published. The report was very well taken among the European, many, or I think the majority, the overwhelming majority of European leaders. And then you have to act on what you feel or what you see is a great way, as a uh, great way to go, a great road to take. But it's very, very slow. Some things are happening, but very, very slow. Then you had a follow-up from the European Commission, specifically on the rearmament of Europe. There are also hindrances on the way. So there are these steps, yeah. The lack of political will that I referred to is about how fast you can go. And if there is an urgency, if there is a sense of urgency, and I think there is a sense of urgency because the new order is being formed right now, in this interregnum, there is a sense of urgency. And, some countries are not able, probably not even not able, not necessarily it's a problem of political will, but probably there are some structural factors that do not allow European countries to be as fast as some other countries. And this is why this idea of two-speed Europe comes up. But I would even go further. And I would say, well, probably not necessarily two-speed Europe, but, multiple speed Europe. There is a way, because if, the European Union of today was not formed, first, it was not formed at once, and it was not formed in 2 waves or 3 waves. It was formed in several waves. And the people who built, the pioneers of the European Union, so they had a vision and they built the united Europe step by step, brick by brick, agreement by agreement. Probably we don't have as much time now because Europe was lucky to be again after the American, at least half of Europe was under American protection, the other half was under the Soviet occupation, Soviet control. So there was no such sense of urgency which exists today. But with the sense of urgency that we have today, that we experience today, this the Europe of multiple speeds, I think, is the answer. Some countries we just need to go, further, farther, and and faster, right? And others will follow with their own speed. They should understand well that they have to reform, they have to modernize, they have to contribute to the this greater European project, but you know they don't have to, they don't have to do this tomorrow. Yeah. So I think this is the, not two speed Europe, but Europe of multiple speeds.
Yeah, I think that's one of the approaches we have to take, especially looking at the lack of speed we have. The Draghi report, I think everyone agrees that we should implement it, but only like 11% of all the policy proposals in it were actually implemented so far. So it's really slow. A lot of this is institutional inertia. Um, but a lot of it is also like active sabotage, I feel, from also actors that are close to United States or to Russia. I mean, we had Orban until recently, who blocked everything. We have still Fico. How much? I mean, a united Europe is basically a red flag for both MAGA, Trumpist America, and the Kremlin. How much do they interfere? How much do they weaponize the populist movements? And yeah, that's basically what can we do against that?
Well, populist movements, they are, first and foremost, they are products of different crises, which are, in my opinion, not generated from outside of European countries. They are, every every European country has its own problems. Sometimes those problems increase, they become worse, and they become conflicts, and they become crises. So it's also a natural state of things. There is nothing, no country is ideal unless it is a horrible dictatorship. But every democratic country, well, that's the feature of democracy. Yes, sometimes you have problems, you have to deal with them. What external autocratic forces are doing, because they want Europe, which is weak, they try to amplify those problems. They want to make those problems worse. And if, for example, we can agree that there is a crisis with, say, immigration, which is very much real. Yeah, and then you have forces that political forces, say right-wing populists of different degrees of radicalism, that are playing or exploiting that crisis in
Hmm.
order to come to power. Well, this is the situation of political warfare. Yeah. You then try to amplify those forces, to support those forces by different means, financially, or in terms of media, or in terms of other forms of political support, etc., etc. Yeah, so this is the political warfare situation. You want Europe weak, you support those forces that make United Europe weaker. And
Yeah.
this is where right wing populism, which focuses predominantly on national situations of things, 27, 28 members of the European Union. So they're easy to manipulate. Nationalist sentiments or national sentiments are increasingly powerful emotionally. It's what nationalism is, I would say, one of the most powerful languages, at least if not ideology, then languages, emotion in the emotional sense. So you can manipulate people and keep Europe weak. That's the whole point of them exploiting right wing populists. And what to do? Well, we need to deal with the problems. We need to deal with the crisis. Yeah. Of course, I would say as well that we need to push back against foreign interference. But at the same time, we need to remember that foreign interference works only if there is a ground for its success. And the ground for its success is, again, those conflicts and crises that European countries are facing. However strong in the information sense, the foreign autocratic, non-European, or even sometimes anti-European forces are, if we don't have, or at least if we don't have those crises, if we deal with those crises and conflict situations, social conflicts successfully, they will not be able to divide us. Just, or whatever instruments they use to do this, propaganda, disinformation, it will not work if we are fine in terms of dealing with those problems.
Yeah. I agree with that very much. Basically, what you're saying is that the propaganda or Russian political warfare, it also exploits like already existing divisions and issues. So the best solution would be to do better politics so the people are not as frustrated with the status quo thing, which is, you can see that very well. I mean, I live in Germany, I see that very well with the AfD, for example. Most people vote for the AfD because they are disappointed by the political center basically just stagnating for the last decade, and also for the last 6 years, 7 years, we had economic stagnation, and people are just going to the fringes because they have lost the trust in the center. Um, and there's like discourse to like ban the party, but I don't see how that would solve the underlying issues. I think we would probably agree with that.
No, look, trust in
Hmm.
politics is at the core of a working democracy. If you don't have trust, you can't have a democracy. This is very clear. You can manipulate, you can engineer trust, but it only works in authoritarian countries. It only
Hmm.
works in autocracies. A real trust, a genuine trust, is a feature, is underlying one of the underlying features of democracy. What is happening, or in many European countries, especially with this right wing turn, is it is in many cases, it is a failure of traditional conservatives
Hmm.
to stand their own ground and to implement policies, conservative policies, yeah, that people, which are the reason why people vote for them.
Yeah.
Let's take Germany. I think, well, I'm sure you know more than me about the German political scene. But if the Christian Democrats are elected or, receive a considerable, significant electoral support from people who vote for their conservative agenda, and then they enter a coalition, a governing coalition with a party that does not allow them to deliver on their conservative agenda, then the natural response of the electorate would be, well, then we will probably vote for more conservative forces, or at least who position themselves as more conservative forces, if you don't deliver on your own conservative promises. This is a natural reaction. Yeah. So, and what the conservatives are doing, not necessarily in Germany, but I think in some ways also in Germany, the conservatives start in the rhetorically basically copy or imitate the far right discourse, the discourse of right wing populists, but it will never work. It will just move the entire conversation towards towards the more radical. More radical wings. This is not the way. The way is that you stand your ground, yeah, and you deliver on what you promise when you are elected. If you don't do this, people will leave you. People will go towards the more extreme forces.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree very much with that assessment. Um, but maybe let's back to also to the topic of building trust. Um, do we still not have also an issue of like selling the European vision or idea? Because I remember reading studies, for example, about Serbia perception on foreign aid. Like if you ask Serbians who pays the most foreign aid to Serbia, and like 80% of all Serbs say it's Russia and China, and then you look at who actually is sending the money, it's like 90% is EU countries, and like Russia is sending 2% of the foreign aid. So there is, I think, in the information space, still like the issue that, especially like Brussels, is very bad at PR. Is that still something we have to fix, or do the fundamentals matter more?
Yes and no. Yain. Yeah. On the one hand, you're absolutely correct. So what uh, the example with Serbia was during the COVID times, the pandemic of COVID-19, and Russia was very much playing or trying to exploit the pandemic in order to strengthen its influence in Serbia. And at that time, Serbia was receiving lots of aid from the European Union, but because Russia was amplifying Chinese help, Chinese aid, it was actually not Russian aid, but the Russians amplified the information about the Chinese aid to Serbia. It felt for many in Serbia, it felt like China was the best helper, the best aid provider for Serbia, which was not true. So on the one hand, yes, there is a lack of communication. There is a lack of self promotion, and there is nothing bad about self promotion for the European Union. On the other hand, we do see European, say, billboards about structural aid. I travel across Europe from time to time. And especially if you go to, not capitals, if you go to smaller cities, if you go to smaller towns, sometimes even villages, you will often see those billboards saying that the grants or structural funding for particular infrastructural projects was provided by the European Union. So you see it. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, so on, but if you're confronted with weaponized propaganda, weaponized disinformation, those traditional ways of self-promotion, like the European Union is using, will probably be hard to beat. Yeah, with these traditional approaches. I can't say what other tactics the European Union could employ in order to, well, communicate about the significance of the EU aid better to countries. But something needs to be done. Yeah, some
Yeah.
marketing experts should work on this. Yeah, so the problem exists. Yes, it's not that the European Union or say Brussels is silent on what it does. It's not silent, but it just maybe needs to speak louder.
Be more effective. Um, you spoke also before about that Europe needs like a vision, clarity where we want to get. Is this just the assessment by you as a political scientist, or do you also have like a vision yourself where you think Europe should be heading? You want to share?
I think it's more of a personal conviction rather than a work of political science, in which, political science is about studying political processes and institutions. So it's not about building visions. It's for politicians to build visions, but also I think it's a work of public intellectuals. It's a work of journalists as well, maybe political scientists, but it's not science as such. It is about personal conviction. I have my own political personal convictions, and I think the United Europe on this Europe of the future is one of them. And I think we need more discussions like this. How we want to see Europe, what we need to do to achieve that. And again, I would warn, I would caution against ideas that, if if imagine something that we need to have it right now, because it is counterproductive. If
Hmm.
we imagine, European Republic, yeah, or European Imperium that I like to talk about, and we say, well, we need to have it tomorrow. First, this is not going to happen, and this is also not going to happen in a year. Yeah, it is a work. It is very, very hard work, and this approach, which is in many ways, I think, was we employed this approach because of social media and because of this media chaos and honestly a very uh, distractive media milieu and information milieu. We want something, everything at once, and if we can't get it, we become depressed and we forget. Okay, so it doesn't work. No, we don't need to do this. We need to go to back to basics. That to build a complex uh, unity for Europe. It is very hard work. It will take time, and it will need from us, from those people who want to see it happen, it's decisiveness and um, concentration. This is very important. We know what we want, and we need to step by step build brick by brick build the what we envision, what we imagine.
Hmm. Hmm. I'm not sure if I entirely agree because this brick by brick approach is what we have been doing basically the last few decades for Europe. And I feel like we are running out of time, especially looking at how the geopolitical landscape is evolving right now with the war in Ukraine, with America turning more and more inward, which probably won't reverse even after Trump. So yeah, we will see. But I think where I agree very much is on the decisiveness, on the direction. We have to be very clear on articulating these visions, discussing them, evolving them. Um, yeah. What would you say are the next most important steps for Europe, for Ukraine, for the landscape right now?
I think the most important thing at the moment is to ensure that Europe can provide its own security, that Europe can meet all the challenges that the new world order is bringing, yeah, to Europe. Um, so this security framework, in my opinion, is the most urgent thing today. Of course, it concerns Ukraine directly. Without a secure Ukraine, there will not be a secure Europe. I think this is something that many understand today.
Yes.
Um, and this is today. It is about pushing Russia back. Yeah? So this is the most urgent thing. There is an assessment that by 2030, Russia may be capable of initiating, say, a conventional conflict with one of the or more NATO member states or EU member states. The rearmament program of the European Commission, it is exactly because of this. It is proceeding in order to be prepared. There's about preparedness for Europe. But this is the most important thing. What is, however, very important as well, and I think not all those leaders who embrace the idea of rearmament understand, is that all these rearmament programs and strengthening security for Europe needs to have democratic legitimacy. We can't just say, well, we need this, and this is why we are doing this. No, every because every big project, and this is a huge project. This is well, first it's existential, and also is huge. There will be billions and billions of euros invested in this rearmament. Yeah, it's already happening. There needs to be democratic legitimacy and social legitimacy. Again, things should be communicated to people because in the end, it's people who are the source of power in a democracy. So leaders should not behave, like the way that led to many democratic leaders losing to populists. Yeah, because they simply ignored some of the real concerns of the population. So this is something also that needs to be communicated quite well. So not only strengthening the security of the European continent, but also talking to the population why it is important. And again, for this, you also need a vision, for what Europe you're trying to build, and also what future Europe you are providing security for today.
I agree very much. Yeah, building trust and this vision and this discourse is what also this podcast is about. And this discussion was a great contribution, I think, to this discourse.
Thank you
Thank you
for
very
the
much.
conversation. Yes, Nikodem.
Thank you very much, Anton. It was great having you.
Obviously, we need more of these discussions with different people from different political camps, I guess,
Yes.
as well.
It's an issue that goes across all political camps and
Of course,
interest groups. If we live in Europe, I mean, unless you're some far right nationalist or some anarchist, I think most people agree we need a clearer vision for Europe and act together across the camps.
absolutely.
Great. That's, I think, a great point to end on. Thank you, Anton.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nikodem.